Welcome back to Monroe Musings. I am so excited for you to meet our guest, Dani. She is an energy healer, writer, and before we dive into the episode, I wanted to preface with some of Dani's human design chart that we didn't go over in our conversation. That way you can see some of these things that are woven through her story. Dani is a 4-6 manifesting generator with split definition. That means that as a manifesting generator, which is the only piece we really touch on in the episode about her chart, they tend to move quickly and do a lot of different things and be multi-passionate. And so you'll definitely get a taste of that in this episode, because having read her book, I can just see how all of those seemingly unrelated jobs or situations ended up in like the culmination in this book. And that is like the epitome of a manifesting generator, to pivot quickly, be interested in lots of different things. And then as a 4-6, she's really meant to be in community, and you'll hear that in the way she tells some of her stories. With the 6 line, and she'll talk about it in the episode, that she just turned 40. And so she's in her second 30 years. 6 lines tend to have their life broken up into 3 phases. And so she's just had her first decade out of that really strong trial and error period that is those first 30 years. And now she's moving into that wise role model phase. And so I just wanted you to have a little bit of a preface before we dove into the episode about her chart, and you can see which pieces that I just talked about show up for her in her story. I'm really excited for you to hear how she combines intuition, being a writer, energy healing, and her journey from, well, instead of me telling you, why don't I just let her tell you her own story? So let's get into it. Hi, Dani. I'm so excited to have you here today. Can you give everyone a brief introduction just of who you are and what you currently do? And then we'll kind of go back through your journey to get there.
Yeah. Hi, Crystal. I'm so excited to talk with you today and share. So, quick overview of me. I'm a writer and energy healer, and recently released my first novel. It's called Sister Earth. And a brief background, I guess, is I knew I wanted to be an author since I was, a child going to the library, reading books, but was a journalist, worked in content marketing for tech companies, and then eventually started to study energy healing and different kinds of meditation to support my own writing, and also teach workshops and do one-on-one coaching for writers. So, as well as editing books and, some other stuff, all tied in with really the themes of intuition and imagination and kind of the overlap of those.
I love it so much. And I know I was just telling you I finished your book this morning, but it's amazing to see that culmination of all the things that you've done. Will you go back, if you don't mind talking about, like, kind of from your religious upbringing to like your spiritual path, and then how you got here? Dani's a manifesting generator. They tend to are multi-passionate and have a very non-linear path. And I've been watching yours for, I feel like, years now, and I would love for them to get a sense of your path and how you navigated from one thing to the next, and any moments of rebellion along the way.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it is so fun to kind of look at it with that hindsight, because when you're on that kind of path, you're kind of like, am I just throwing spaghetti at the wall? What am I doing here? And I just turned 40. So it does start to come together and make sense. And this is something I think about a lot as a writer, because, you get to like that third act of a book and you start bringing together the A plot, the B plot, the C plot, and you find everything's related. And I find that that's the same with life too, that you think you have all this like chaos going on, but it actually does. It does all tie together. That's just how life works. But yeah, I grew up in the suburbs in Southern California, just very kind of idyllic childhood was in a family that was religious. We were evangelical, and I'm sure everyone can relate to this. You grow up a certain way and you think that your family is just very normal and it's all that you know. And my parents took me to like a creation conference when I was like, I feel like I was 10 or 12. I was pretty young. But yeah, believed in like 7-day creation and that evolution was a lie. And so there were, some of these like very, what most people might think of as like very conservative beliefs that were just very normal to me. And then I went away to college. One of the rules my parents set was like it has to be a religious school. And they weren't even, it was a religious school, a very conservative Christian school, but like that school actually taught evolution, and you were required to take a couple Bible classes as part of your degree. And in my Old Testament class, we learned that like the creation story is a poem, not like a scientific description of the world being created. And so even within Christianity, in college, I started to kind of have the details questioned and find that different people believe different things about this. And so it became kind of a gradual shift. And one of the big questions I had around that time as well was like my church and even my school were really big on like you can't have sex till you're married. And the more that I looked at like the Bible verses they were using for that, the more I was like, this doesn't actually seem to add up. It seems to be more of like a leftover of a more patriarchal culture, but not necessarily, what's being recommended in terms of the religion itself. So that was a big question that I had that was a big part in questioning religion as a whole. So fast forward a couple of years later, I moved to New York, was working in journalism, and in New York was the first place where I had a group of friends who were not religious. So I always had friends from church or from my religious school. But it was the first time I had that different social group. And when you have a different social group, you suddenly it can open up a different side of yourself. You don't have people judging you or knowing that you have a certain belief system or moral system. And so that was like a big turning point for me in kind of stepping outside of like going to church on a regular basis and following the things that I had already been questioning, starting to actually like live differently. So I actually have another book. The first book that I published is a short memoir, and it's called Shameless. And so I wrote that about that experience, and it goes into the decision to not wait till I was married to have sex. And I mean that was a big rebellion, and I didn't tell my religious friends for a long time until the book came out. So there was like that period of time between when I made that choice for myself and when I eventually wrote about it, maybe like five or so, at least 5 years later. So from there, though, because Crystal and I know each other from a manifestation group, and so that a lot of mysticism and spirituality around that. I went through a phase where I kind of didn't believe in anything. I was just kind of very neutral on all things spiritual. But eventually, I had a difficult point in my career and a lot of kind of breakdowns, and wanted to believe in something again. I wanted, I missed that ability to pray and feel like everything was connected and that there was some force out there that was taking care of me. Because, and I also have to say, like, when I first moved to New York and like got a job there, like there's so many things in my life up to that point where I believed I was having a two-way conversation with God and God was leading me to do a certain thing and that everything would be taken care of. And that was nice. And when I didn't have that, everything was a lot more difficult. So I knew I couldn't like readopt the entire conservative Christian system I had before, but I wanted to find something that felt connected. It took some time to build up that faith again once it had kind of been taken away. But yeah, I got into more of like a open-minded spirituality and meditation, and kind of one thing led to another. But I would say the writing novels was a big turning point, specifically because I had really bad writer's block. And so I got into meditation to help me with that. And that took me down the rabbit hole where I went from, meditation to energy healing. I learned about like chanting and just all of these different spiritual traditions and manifestation because then I wanted to, manifest a book deal. And so just started to learn so much. And yeah, from, continue to be so fascinated by all these different spiritual practices and beliefs and to bring it back to the start, it's also helped me redefine and understand Christianity in a different way because there's a lot there that I've gotten to kind of reclaim now seeing it through a new lens.
That's amazing. I'm actually glad you left on that point because the while you were talking, I was thinking, man, it's so nice to hear someone say basically, you came back to God, but without the rules of religion. You were like through your own relationship, through your own lens, through your own practices, and it's kind of like don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. I know for a lot of people, I didn't grow up religious. I did different, I would say, like stints going to church with friends and Bible study with friends, but it wasn't from it within my own household. And I also always wonder when someone comes to spirituality that had a religious background, it's like you're gonna have some more barriers because you're still like, oh, I don't want all these things again. And then there's people I feel like me who grew up with nothing, and it's like to go from kind of nothing to figuring it out, just everyone's path of discovering that connection to God and what that means to them. I'm really glad you brought that up. I found too, for me, even as someone who didn't grow up going to church so much, like I said, there was like a year here or a year there where I maybe tagged along, but there is a huge draw to church in a spiritual sense. Like you want to be around people who have this spiritual connection and it's the sense of community and not being in a silo. And I can totally see missing those aspects of church, but I'm glad you were able to kind of come not full circle, but come back to it in your own way.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I think something else you said that's interesting is like, you leave the system, but sometimes you still have that programming. And I find this with some of my writing clients who come from a religious background that they left the religion behind, but they still have this concept of like some intelligence outside of them that has the answers and that they're wrong. And so they need like the tarot cards to tell them like what to work on or to make a decision or a pendulum or, these different spiritual methods. And that's something that I've also had to reprogram the more that I practice manifestation is that I'm not trying to like please the universe to get what I want, but it's more of like tuning into yourself and choosing. And it's such a nuance, but if you come from a religious background, you kind of have it in your head that I'm wrong and there's some other force that's right.
Which is so fascinating because you're
Mhm.
created in the image of God.
Yeah.
And I feel like for those of you who don't know, Danny and I met through To Be Magnetic for TBM manifestation work. And I feel like a lot of what you're saying obviously aligns with that, where it's you were born like inherently worthy. You came with a purpose and with gifts. And whether you believe that's from God or the universe or however you spiritually believe that, a lot of our life, which we're talking about programming, has taken us away from that, right? They, like you're saying, they told us we were wrong for this thing. And so we,
Mhm.
in order to be loved and cared for, especially as children, when other people are our source of safety and survival, we conform to what they expect of us. And then we're coming back as adults, working to come back to this innate worthy self that shows up with the purpose we came here with and as the person we came here as. And to think that I was sent here to not be who I was sent here as, like, why would God send me here with this mission on my heart and this purpose and this personality and all these things if I wasn't meant to use them? Like, was the whole point for me to come here and squash it? So I think that's a great take on it, and I can totally see that in writers having writer's block, and you're like, you really do know, you just don't wanna say it or you just don't wanna put it there or you're hesitating because of some programming that has you in a state of fear or shame.
Mhm. Yeah, there's this feeling of like, oh, well, that can't be right. Like that's what I want, so it can't be right. Uh, yeah, and to give an embodied example like that's really what's been so difficult for me about actually acting on the dream of writing books. And so much of what I did, so I studied business in college because I thought that was, more responsible. And I took journalism and creative writing on the side, like classes that didn't even count to the degree. And then I graduated and was like, well, I actually don't want a job with this degree. So let me go to my graduate school for journalism. But that was still kind of like one step away from, I really wanted to be writing fiction. And I knew that. And then, so I did journalism, but then I wanted something more lucrative. So I did content marketing. So it was always like, I was like, well, I want to be writing, but like, I'll sacrifice something so that I can write. And I think that's, I mean, you can see how that's kind of connected to religion. Like you can't really have what you want. You have to sacrifice something to have what you sort of want. And that actually I mean, that worked for a while. Like I had a whole career basically doing that. But at some point, it's like what I think of as like the soul starts to get louder and starts to you start to sabotage yourself from the inside. And so I almost felt like I was kind of being like dragged towards my own dream. And that's how it felt, because it felt scary to step away from what was supposedly going to be safe. But I mean, it's kind of like what you're saying, where it's just like when you have that programming, it feels wrong to go after the thing that resonates most authentically. That is your contribution. And now I find that with marketing my book, where I feel like I'm asking people a favor, like, hey, can you read and share about this? Or I feel like I'm imposing on people. And then I'm like, it's actually not. This is my contribution to what this whole global humanity thing is that we're doing. So I'm not asking people to do something outside or do a favor for me. Like the exchange is that I've written the book and now people get to enjoy it, and it inspires them, and the clients I have, like it inspires them to write their stuff. And so just, everything's connected in a way that we don't really understand. And I also like this analogy of marching band, and when they get into formation and then it looks like chaos, but they're moving to the next formation, like doing whatever it is that your soul is wanting to do is like going to your spot. And the formation isn't going to work if each of us don't hit the mark that we are intended to be doing.
Yeah, I feel like that aligns so much with human design too. It's like, no, go back to your way of doing it. And it doesn't have to be the way human design says, but the whole concept is like you have your own unique way of doing things. And it's okay for you to not do it the way everyone else says to do it, or to not do the thing everyone else says you need to do. Do it in the way that lights you up the most, in the way that you were meant to do it, because that does end up giving your gift back to society, and it's bringing your gift for everyone else to experience. And like you said, not only is everyone getting to experience now your gift of this book, but you giving your gift to the world is inspiring other people to also bring their gift to the world.
Hmm. Yeah, because I think people can feel that resonance when you meet someone who's really doing what they're meant to do. Like you can probably think of a few people you've encountered who are doing that. And yeah, so that feels exciting. And I think it does help people because, we're all on this journey, help people see that it can be safe to do the thing that really lights you up, and to not have this, false like sense of exchange where I have to do something I don't like in order to like do a little bit of the thing I do like.
That makes sense. So tell us about Sister Earth. I think you mentioned it started with a dream. So maybe start from there if that's a good starting place, and then tell us.
Yeah, definitely. So, uh, book ideas come to me in different ways, but usually it's like I'll have an idea, but then it becomes a combination of ideas that becomes the story, I guess. And I really like imagining worlds. So that's like my favorite part, is coming up with a world where like X, Y, and Z is happening. And then from there I'm like, okay, well, who's the character? What do they got to do through this like plot of the book? But I had been in a writing group and I was still working at a startup job. And it was like March 2020. So, like, we were all just like in, early pandemic mode of chaos. And so, I mean, it's not surprising that I had a weird dream at that time, but I woke up from a dream and I was like, oh, that's like a fiction idea. Like, that's like a whole place. And so, in the dream, I was with some friends and we were traveling to another planet to lay our eggs. So, and there was like within the dream, there was like this pressure of like, well, we've gotta like have the numbers up. We've got to lay like a certain number of eggs. So there was already that kind of tension. And so, yeah, I was like, that's like the coolest thing. So then from there, it's like, well, how did they get there? What is this world where like they've got to like go travel through space to lay eggs? And so then that kind of layered on top of some other existing things I wanted to explore. One of them was feminine power because I had read another novel that kind of just swapped the genders. So it was about this world where women are in power, but they're toxic in the exact same way that men are toxic now in power. And I was like, okay, really cool book, amazingly written. But I was like, if it was switched and we had women in power, I'm sure they'd have some toxic traits and there would be some issues, but I don't think they would be the same issues as men. I think that there are some innate differences between masculine and feminine energy. So I wanted to explore in kind of a funny way what it would be like if women were in power, but obviously not in terms of like utopia, like everything's great, but like that there are still some issues happening. So it was exploring feminine power, but then also trying to create a world because I love I've loved dystopian books. That's like been a big part of my reading and movies. But that's what I noticed during the pandemic. I started to hear a lot of people saying because we were living a dystopia that they were like, I just can't read a dystopia right now. And I was like, well, yeah, that makes sense. And then especially the more I learned about manifestation, that what we dwell on, what we think about is what we kind of direct our GPS towards. So if you're worrying about things going wrong, you like unconsciously make choices towards those exact things going wrong. So once you do manifestation, you start to connect with the patterns and you see how that plays out in your life. So then I was like, well, on a collective level, if we keep watching these dystopias, then we keep essentially making choices like policies and creating technology aimed at dealing with like this world where, everyone is out for themselves and everyone's selfish and there's, bad people in power. Like that's just kind of when you create things for that world, you end up with that world. And I think we already kind of have done that in many ways. So part of the book too was like, let me paint this picture of these people just living in tune with nature. But at the same time, they have what I call intuitive technology. So they don't use like devices or computers, but there's a lot of what they do that it's based on real concepts from energy healing and it's stuff that we can actually do right now. But I use kind of a lot of technology kind of terms to put it into context. For example, one of those is the Akashic records. If people are spiritual, they might have heard of that. It's a way to connect intuitively. And it's also a lot like having a shared Google Drive where you just have access to information, a lot like the internet, but you don't need a device. You just use your own intuitive connection. So there's kind of a fun blend of things that feel ancient and things that feel very futuristic in how I created the world. And if someone walks away from it thinking like, they close the book and they're like, I want to move there. I would like to opt into that reality. Then I feel like I've done my job.
Yeah, I love the weaving in of the what you were calling technology, which is ancient, and I like that it is both ancient and futuristic, but for me that's hopeful because I'm hoping we will go back to more ancient ways in a lot of senses. Obviously, I like plumbing and I like air conditioning, so I don't necessarily want to give all those things up, but there's definitely some ancient practices and ways of life I think we should be going more back to. So it is nice that it was a blend of both. And the records just, it was very empowering in that way, where our brain is an antenna. And so that is the technology, at least in our world. And I love being able to watch that play out in the world you created. I am more of a adult book reader typically. And so this is very light and I worry, I'm like, I have to read this and I love the concept, but will I get into it? Because I'm usually like, give me the dark romance angsty And I was so sucked in. I just was like, I so do want to be part of this world. And then like, ooh, not that, but yes, that. And it's like people made decisions that make you be like, oh, I don't want that in my life. But the world in itself, I would so love to live in a world where we're connected to nature and to each other in that way.
Yeah, yeah, because it's nature, and the friends are basically telepathic. So instead of texting, they kind of just mentally ping each other. Which I share that part with people, and they're like, "Yeah, we do that already." Like you have that experience where you think of a friend, and then their text pops up. But yeah, another really fun one element of it is that the women leaders, the sages, communicate with the plants and the animals. And so they kind of negotiate with the mosquitoes that you can bite humans if they're outside of the city, but not inside the city. And I mean, that's very real. I did on my podcast, I did a series on animal communication. And one of the women that I interviewed is very afraid of spiders. And so she's traveling and she sees a spider inside. She'll ask it to leave, like intuitively, and it'll leave by the next day. She's just like, I'm sorry, I'm scared of you. Would you mind going to the next room? And so, yeah, it's something that feels very fantasy, but it's just very real here and now.
Yeah, I think it's just more what do we say? It's not rare. You made things that are more rare for us or only in certain subgroups, maybe even believe in it or partake in it, but made it just society wide. The people have access to those gifts. And I love that. I think that's the futuristic part of it, right? We hope people can tap in and learn how to communicate better. And I would say everyone, although I'm sure there's exclusions, people have experienced that thing where you think of somebody and they text you or your phone starts ringing or they walk in the room, something like that. So people, even non-spiritual people have some of these experiences.
Yeah, very common experiences that we have that we just, if you don't have a concept for it, you just don't think about it. But if you start thinking about it, you're like, oh, wow, that's like a thing that's going on. And I would also say, I wrote it in a way that anyone non-spiritual it'll just be really entertaining and fun. But for someone who is spiritual, who has heard of the Akashic records, like there's just a lot of kind of Easter eggs of little things that like you're gonna get on a deeper level.
Yeah, someone was just asking in a group I'm in yesterday. They were like, I want something like kind of lighthearted and where nature matters. Like I was like, I have a book for you. So I love that.
Yeah, I think that's the vibe right now. I see that on Threads a lot where people are just like, can we get rid of Netflix and go back to like, performing plays in our backyard? And it's like, yeah, that's what I want. And the book was written to let you escape to that world for at least a couple hours.
Any other books in the work?
Oh my gosh. Well, yes, I did write Sister Earth in a way to set up for a sequel.
I was hoping you were going to say that.
Yeah. Yeah, so I do want it to be a trilogy. I'm still kind of open on like where it will pick up, and actually I think it'll be really fun for me to see how people respond to it. The more, I go around promoting and people are reading and everything, because I mean, I don't know if this is unique to me as an author, but like I said, I like creating the world, but then what happens there, it could go in a lot of different directions. It's almost like I've created a playground and I want other people to come and play in it. So I have always wanted to sell the film rights, and I think it'd be so fun if filmmakers took it and took the plot in a new direction, or took one of the characters and went off on a tangent or something like that. Yeah, like I feel like openness and freedom about what can happen there. So I don't know if a sequel would pick up right where we left off, or I'm really interested in, well, I don't want to give too many spoilers, but I'm really interested in the next generation because so much of it is about motherhood. The characters are becoming mothers. So, but then I also have so many other ideas that I want to explore as well. And usually what I write is the intersection of kind of that like mystical sci-fi, I guess. So I have a short story where it's about the moon getting closer and the geological impact of that. So that one's kind of fun too.
Awesome. Well, I feel like you kind of wrote this into your main character a little bit. And when you were talking earlier in the episode about writer's block, I was like, oh, I feel like that was a little weaved into her character. Do you feel like the more you write, now that you've kind of accepted, like, I'm a fiction writer and you're actually doing your thing, do you feel like that opened the well, so to speak? Like, more ideas come now that you're giving life to them, and the more you write, the more you come up with? Will you talk about that a little bit?
Definitely. Yeah, it's so interesting. So if people have experience with working with their intuition or, trying to connect with their intuition more, that's something that's, very widely taught is the more that you listen to intuition, if it's like go to a coffee shop, say hi to that person, the more you do the little things, the more you get the flow going and the more your intuition starts to communicate the bigger things. And that's exactly how it is with writing. So yeah, I mean, when I when I went into studying energy healing, I was like, "Oh, I just feel like I have all these ideas up here and I can like see the whole thing, but I can't get it written." So I felt like I had this like block. And so I did energy healing and like, that definitely helped. That definitely helped, but at a certain point, I realized that the writing was what was clearing that pathway. So, it does come down to like you can do the energy healing or meditation that helps you regulate your nervous system, and that makes it a little bit easier. But in order to get that flow going, you do have to actually take the action of writing. And then the more you do that, the more these two things kind of intersect to, I think, you get what I would call like a healthy flow. And I always try to come up with like an analogy of it because knowing energy healing, if you think of like the seven chakras that go down the spine, it's almost like they're each a whole and you have to have them lined up and then everything can just flow through. And that's a really good visual for me because yeah, it's just kind of like you hit like that sweet spot. But yeah, so to answer your question, the more that I write consistently, the more that it flows. And I wrote the first draft. Well, I started a couple different times, but the draft that ended up being the book was written in about 3 months. But then like a year and a half went by before I did deep revisions on it and before I hired an editor. And when I hired the editor, one of her big recommendations was like, it ends too quick. It's almost like there's like a missing section at the end to close all the loops. So so I had to write that. And that was a very different experience than even the first draft that from a year and a half before, where, I think the whole book, but especially that final sequence was like, I'm just sitting down to write and I'm just seeing the movie play in my head and I'm just like documenting. And that's what makes writing really fun. And that's what I like to teach writers to write from an intuitive place because rather than being like, I have to force myself to sit down, I have to try to perform and all of like the perfectionism that comes in, it's like, no, I need to get myself in a regulated state and kind of see myself as almost like the secretary of my higher self, who's the one with the ideas. I just kind of like show up and it's like for me, it's I'm watching a movie in my head. For other people, I think we have different intuitive skills where it might play out differently, but the flow is always on, and it's more just like getting your human antenna into position so that you can best receive it.
Amazing. Yeah, I feel like the nervous system work is more like getting out of your own way. Like, I'm getting my anxiety out of the way. I'm getting those like self-critical, self-talk, all that stuff kind of out of the way. I'm clearing that up. And then you start getting into the flow and things come in. I know most of my writing, it's up to this point, has been more in the like academic world. And so I was relating to your story though, because I wrote my original dissertation or the first part of it for a couple of years. And then the same thing, 2020 happened, and no one would participate in this research project that I had created, even though it was just online surveys. And so I got to this sticking point and I quit, and I was, like 60 plus pages into this, multiple years into this draft of this paper. And I was like, you know what? I'm not doing this. And when I picked it back up about 3 years later, I was changing directions a little bit, but it was very weird. Like, I was a new person 3 years later, and a lot of that old writing, I'm like, "I'm trying to build off of this." It was very, like, kind of discombobulating to try to work with the old material, and then there's also, like, I needed updated references and stuff that comes along with academic writing, but still is like, "Oh, I wrote that? That's crazy." It's, like, the same topic, but it was a different version of me, and then I would find, I'm just gonna go, work on this for an hour. It's like, no, I need multiple hours because it takes me a little while for that well to open and to get into that flow. And something similar I found with doing like the morning pages was I feel like that first half of a page, I'm literally writing like, I don't know what to write today. I don't know what to write today. Something will come to me, but I don't know what to write today. And then all of a sudden, just things come and I write and I write and I write. And there's usually kind of a sticking point in the middle where I'm like, "Oh man, I still have a whole nother page to write." And then by the end of the third page, I'm like, crap, I have so many ideas, but I'm at the end of my page and I've been writing like more than my allotted time this morning. So I do feel that like well open up, but it's also interesting to revisit our own writing or to be told you have to insert something here that hadn't already come to you. And you're like trying to specifically have a well open on in like a like you're really guiding it like nope, it has to be right here and fit in the story right here, and I need this like particular thing, but I also want it to like come from intuition without forcing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think something I hear a lot from writers is that they're afraid of sitting down and writing and then wasting it if they take the time to write something and then don't end up using it. Like you're saying, like you wrote the thing and then you come back later and then you're like, actually, I'm gonna start over. I just want to convince people because I know, we have that. It's the inner critic. It's that you're gonna, efficiency programming, like you're gonna waste the time or something like that. And it's like, well, yeah, you might not end up using the writing, but it's like something's happening in your brain and something's definitely happening in your energy field when you do that writing. And so even if you do write it and the years go by and you come back and you don't use it, there's still been something that's been accomplished through the fact that you sat down and wrote that influences what you write later. So it's always part of the job and part of the work to have done it. But also, the first page of a novel is really important. And so something that I did with Sister Earth, I rewrote it a bunch of times, but I would write the opening and then I wouldn't look at it and then I would just start again. And so something about that is like my intuition would kind of remember from earlier drafts what I liked about them without referring back. And so then I would get to keep that, but then I would still kind of come to it fresh. And I think that really helped because sometimes you can over edit stuff and it just feels clumped together in a weird way. So just putting aside anything that's been written and then sitting down to a fresh page was really helpful in getting something that kind of flowed and had the all the details that I needed to set people up, but also felt really resonant.
What was coming to me while you were talking about that, like everything you write is important, whether it makes it into the final cut or not, was bringing it back to sports psychology is like, do your practices not count? Did those throws not matter? Did those shots not matter? Because they were at practice, but they were still a rep. They were still building up to like the main thing. And I feel like almost all that content that gets cut was your reps.
Yeah, and I love that analogy because for writers, that is what's happening. But, for sports, it's like you can maybe see the muscle change because you're doing the reps. So it's a little more obvious. Like, yeah, you've got to, like, if you're going to run a marathon, you've got to go for some runs ahead of time. You're not going to just do the thing because writers have this, like, I don't know where this idea comes from, but they just think they're going to sit down and write a book and do the final draft in one go. And everyone who's a writer eventually learns that that's not how it happens. But yeah, there's such a resistance to doing reps for writing. And that's why I like energy healing, as like the concept of energy healing, because our energy field has form. We don't see it. But I mean, that's kind of what I'm saying and trying to get across is like when you sit down and write and do the morning pages, it's kind of like you're giving your energy field like it's like you're brushing your teeth. You're like clearing everything out. So something is changing, even if you're not going to use that writing, you're having like a real impact on your entire system, which helps you be a better writer, but also helps you be happy and communicate well and all this other stuff that comes with having a clear energy field.
I mean, it's kind of like venting. Sometimes the words are actually like venting like you would to a friend, but other times it sounds like just energetically it is like lifting a little bit of the lid off and letting out some steam, clearing out some stuff that's just been stewing in there.
Yeah, definitely.
So, where would you want to send people to? How can they get Sister Earth and how can they work with you if they're a writer or anything
Yeah,
else can they work?
yeah. So my website is great, DaniFankhauser.com, and you'll see information about the book as well as links to where you can buy it. You can buy it a bunch of different places. You can get a signed paperback with an oracle card reading, which is super fun for me to get to kind of share that because, the characters in the book use intuition. I used intuition to write it. And so, kind of giving that little intuitive gift with the book is a super fun promotion that I'm doing. The book just came out in October 2025, at least for the fall. That's going to be available. But yeah, you can get it pretty much any place that they sell books. And I would also recommend connecting with me on Instagram, Dani Fankhauser. And I have a group called Vocal Oracles, and it's intuitive writers. And we get together twice a month. We read our work aloud. We do some energy healing. We do some like journal prompts, just a lot of stuff, related to everything we've talked about with like dealing with the inner critic and uh, having that accountability of seeing yourself as a writer and getting to connect and with other writers and talk about the unique things that we deal with. So that's a great way to get familiar with working with me and potentially explore working one-on-one.
Awesome. I will put the links to your website and to Instagram in the show notes so people can go there too. And anything that I didn't ask you that you wish I had?
Oh my gosh, this is super fun. Yeah, this is a great conversation. And I hope, yeah, people get a sense of the book. And if, it's up your alley, that you go check it out. And also for anyone who is a writer, yeah, I hope that, kind of hearing about my experience with it has resonated with you in some way that you just see that it's possible because I think we need that sometimes to see how someone goes from like self-doubt to doing the work to actually putting something out there. So, yeah, I'm always excited to hear from people when something in my story resonates and it helps them see the potential in themselves.
Amazing. Yes, Danny is an amazing expander for anyone who's a writer or into energy work. So go check her out. Thank you so much for coming today.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was so fun.
Thanks for tuning into Monroe Musings. I hope this conversation gave you permission to trust yourself a little more, to choose your nature rather than culture. If you haven't already, I would so appreciate you to subscribe to the show. And if you would like to explore your own human design chart or learn more about working together, please go to my website. And remember, going against the grain isn't just rebellion, it's coming home.